Thanks for tuning into my new show, Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. I'm Steve Raye, author of the book, How to Get U.S. Market Ready. And in my previous podcast, I shared some of the lessons I've learned from 30 years in the wine and spirits business, helping brands enter and grow in the U.S. market. This series will be dedicated to the personalities who have been working in the Italian wine sector in the U.S., their experiences, challenges, and personal stories. I'll uncover the roads that they walked, shedding light on current trends, business strategies, and their unique brands. So, thanks for listening in, and let's get to the interview. Hi, this is Steve Raye, and welcome to this week's edition of Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. My guest this week is Jeff Carroll, who is General Manager of Avalara, and you'll find out a little bit more about that in a minute. But Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, Steve. I'm happy to be here.
Give us a little background on you and how you came to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been doing effectively alcohol compliant software for about 16 years. So coincidentally, I actually kind of stumbled into the opportunity to work with 688 Solutions, which we eventually changed our name to Ship Compliant in May of 2005. And that happened to be the month that the Granholm versus Heald Supreme Court decision came down. So that was fortuitous timing. And was with Ship Compliant for 11 years. It was sold to Sovos in 2015. I left in 2016. And later on in 2017, I joined Compli and Rachel Raye at Compli and was there for about, I guess, a little over a year. And then we eventually sold Compli to Avalara. Really good fit because Avalara is just a really great software company with scalable and robust technology. And Compli had been in business in the Paso area doing wine compliance really for about 20 plus years. So putting those two companies together ended up being a really nice combination.
So now you're the general manager of Avalara, and you're the guy who has all the answers when it comes to, can I ship this product to this state? Or if not you, the system that Avalara, or service that Avalara provides, that's basically it. But let's talk a little bit about history, because some of the people listening might not know the significance of Granholm. We all do. So put that into perspective, and then also reference the Supreme Court. I just saw a headline the other day, ducking the issue. That was the headline. Supreme Court ducks direct shipping issue. And then news today that Iowa has just approved retailer shipping into Iowa. So
okay, yeah, I will try to connect all those. I'll try to connect all those dots. So right, so in 2005, you had the Granholm Supreme Court decision. I mean, I think the wine industry really has been working at the direct shipping issue for roughly 30 years with a purposeful strategy. Right. And that strategy included legislation, right? Lobbying states to change laws. It included consumer advocacy, right, through Free the Grapes. And I will disclose I'm on the board of Free the Grapes. And then also litigation. There was a group that I think has been basically disbanded called Coalition for Free Trade. And they took a litigation strategy and had a successful campaign that resulted in the Supreme Court decision that basically said that states had to treat businesses even-handedly, right? You couldn't allow an in-state business to, in the case of Granholm, it was specifically about wineries in Michigan and New York. You couldn't allow in-state wineries to ship to consumers in New York, but prohibit out-of-state wineries from shipping into New York. So a lot of people thought that changed everything overnight. It really didn't, but what it did is it became a catalyst for states to revisit their laws. And you saw from 2005 until today, really, just a flood of legislative activity where all these states are creating these systems that allow for direct shipping from wineries.
Let me interrupt there. So the Granholm thing, that was the point, that it was relative to a domestic winery and did not, or is known to now to not include retailers. And as we all know, Granholm was about wineries and not retailers. And that's kind of the area that at least I'm most interested in, because we're talking about an imported wine from Italy. So I'm sorry, go on. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think that that's a point of much debate, right, as to whether Granholm was specifically limited to wineries or whether it's
Right, because they didn't actually say that, but that's the interpretation, right?
yeah, and first, and no, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, right? So I only go so far, but that was a topic of much debate, and that's where, to your earlier question, this whole Tennessee wine decision from a couple years ago comes into play. Is even though that case wasn't directly about direct shipping, it was more about, I think, Total Wine and More and whether or not they could get a license in Tennessee and their residency requirements. It did provide a little bit of clarity, or at least most people thought it provided clarity about whether or not these principles of Granholm apply to other tiers, like the retail tier and wholesale tier.
So in this case, it was that the entity had to be a resident of the state in order to get a retail license to uh, build and run a liquor store. Is that about it?
Right. And whether or not that was constitutional, correct.
Okay. And so there's been a lot of back and forth. Let me back up a bit. We were in the middle of connecting the dots, and I interrupted you. But two other points. You had mentioned Free the Grapes, which was an interesting organization, really basically pushing for retailers to be allowed to ship interstate or compete, in the modern world that we live in. I'm talking just post 2000, not necessarily, post COVID. There's also an organization called NAWR, National Association of Wine Retailers, headed by Tom Work, who you know quite well. And in fact, one of the things we were talking about, you did a webinar, I guess, with him a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was brilliant and interesting. Tell us a little about Tom and your association with him.
Yeah, no, I've known Tom for a long time, and Tom wears several hats. NAWR is one of the main hats. He's also a prolific blogger on the fermentation wine blog, and he also does communications. And so I've worked with him in various capacities over the year. And I think we're both kind of industry observers and like to chat about what's going on in the industry. And he's got a lot going on right now with NAWR. So following that Tennessee wine decision, they've also pursued a litigation strategy. And you've actually seen some states and some circuits actually seemingly go against what the Supreme Court provided in the Tennessee wine case, and then they've tried to appeal that a couple times to the Supreme Court unsuccessfully. They don't yet have what's called a circuit split, and I think that the Supreme Court tea leave readers would say that's usually the most helpful way to get a case taken up, but they'd like to have this question settled once and for all.
So define that term, circuit split.
Oh yeah, so there's, I think, 9 circuits around the country that are made up of multiple states, where a case escalates first to a circuit court before it gets to the Supreme Court. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a little bit out of my depth. But if you have an opinion in the First Circuit and an opinion in the Ninth Circuit, if they're at odds with each other, so the First Circuit might say, hey, yes, it does apply, and the Ninth Circuit might say, no, it does not, then that's where the Supreme Court might come in and settle that difference.
Okay. So just recently, one of the cases, I don't remember which one, actually was put before the court. I think it's called Grant Certiorari, but don't quote me either because I'm not a lawyer. But then they chose not to take the case. And the significance of that was what? Kicking the can down the road? Or
Well, yeah, I think that, yeah, it's kicking the can down the road. They're going to let the courts play out. I've heard people say it may take up to 10 years to actually get back to the Supreme Court, because they did just hear this Tennessee wine case a couple years ago. And so what that means is that you have some laws on the books that some might consider to be discriminatory that will remain in place. until this case is perhaps further clarified by the courts.
Well, you're talking like a lawyer. You're doing a good job of it.
Sorry.
That's okay. And so today, in a more practical application, and we're recording this on November 11th, Iowa said that they will allow retailers to ship into Iowa, and that was a big change. You talk about the significance of that.
Geez, I'm embarrassed to say that wasn't on my radar.
Really?
Yeah, I did not see that news.
Well, I'll
Yeah,
tell you,
so
I think it's really significant. Well, compare Iowa and Idaho. Now that you know about Iowa, and we know the Idaho changed.
right. Yeah, so anytime there's a new state added for retailers, that is kind of a big deal. I think that since Granholm happened in 2005, you've seen wineries just add states, right? And now they're at 47 states. Retailers have in some ways gone backwards. Some states have kind of leveled down and prohibited since Granholm, right, have prohibited both out of state retailers and in state retailers to ship. And that's fine as long as it's even.
Right, sure. So the 47, meaning that domestic wineries can ship to 47 states. Imported wines, which obviously are not manufactured here, have to go through an importer, and importers are not allowed to direct ship. We have to go through the 3-tier system. So the net is imported wines don't fall under the same laws in that regard.
That is correct.
And then we come to reality. And reality is, and if you add Iowa to the number, I think it's now 10 states that allow retailer to consumer interstate shipping of wine, because you knocked Idaho out a month or so ago, and then Iowa today.
I think it'd be 15 because it was at 16, and then both Idaho and Nevada dropped off. I'm happy to get into those, but and then if it's the case that Iowa added and I missed that, then I think that would take it from 14 to 15 states for retailers. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously there's a disconnect there, but the reality is, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble, a lot of retailers are shipping to a lot of states who are, not cited as states where it is permitted for retailers to ship into. A lot of retailers are shipping to 20, 30, 40 states. And I don't get how does that work?
Well, I think you see different types of business models. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? There are some outfits that are just shipping illegally, right, to states that would require a license with or that prohibit shipping, people shipping where they shouldn't be. There's certainly some of that. I would make the case that that's not as expansive as some would make it out to be. But other companies employ strategies, right, that leverage in-state businesses, right? So you could, if you have you could ship to the 15 or 14 or 15 retail states from California. But then if you want to get into New York, and New York isn't a state that allows interstate shipments from California, you could open a retail store in New York, and you could move product to that store and sell products from that store through the same website. So it's sometimes you look at a site and you see that list of states and you don't always know exactly how it's working behind the scenes.
Right. You have to be pretty specific about who's shipping what to who, where, under what license. So, for example, I can't remember everybody's model, but there's a whole bunch, 50 shades of gray, I imagine, on whether you have a physical retail store in the state or just a license, whether you are a third-party aggregator and facilitator. That's the word, like Amazon does. They don't actually take ownership of the product. It's just more of an affiliate marketing thing. We've got GoPuff coming into the market now, and they're with their micro warehouses. So there's all kinds of variations on the theme, and a bunch of players in it, Instacart and all the rest of that stuff, which kind of changed the landscape a little bit with such subtleties that it's almost impossible to grasp. And in fact, I found to graph, because I've tried to do that, make an Excel spreadsheet. I'm sure you guys do this all the time. And I'm going, yeah, but no, really. So it's very difficult for me to give advice to my clients on what they can and cannot do. And at the end of the day, where I default to is these these are states where retailers are shipping to. I'm assuming that what they're doing is legal through whatever manner they do it. And if they allow us to, we can do promotions through them. And that's a way for my clients' brands to be sold through e-commerce. There was also an instance, you may recall, about 5 years ago now, where the FedEx and UPS, which are the two common carriers that legally carry and deliver alcohol. The U.S. Postal Service doesn't do it, and that's under discussion. And I think it might even be included in this Omnibus Act. Not the Omnibus. This is the Infrastructure Act. The Omnibus was the one that was 3 years ago, where the taxes on wines and spirits and beer were dramatically reduced. But I digress. So the point here is, so many things are changing at that one time when those common carriers said, we are going to take a hard line here. We are not going to deliver into states where there's any risk to us. And then they told the retailers they can't do it. And there are a lot of people who had really made e-commerce a huge part of their business that were basically shut down, in a heartbeat.
Overnight. Yep. Yes. I do remember that. and that's becoming a big issue. Right.
I mean, are we going back to that? Because, I mean, basically, we're back to the same situation. Hey, somebody might say, either at the state or federal level or TTB or regulatory level, hey, this is getting out of hand. You guys got to stop this. And I think what the retailers want, if I can speak for them, just, as you say, an even playing field, right? And an answer. Can I or can't I? And where? I don't want to run the risk of stepping over the line without knowing where the line is.
Yeah.
Which is where you guys come in, right?
Sure. We can definitely help with that. I mean, I think, let's see, the couple of points that I'll try to sprinkle in there. So number one, yes, the carrier issue is big and important, and we might probably want to get into fulfillment houses as well. So what's happening is states are just starting to take a closer look at direct shipping. And they're starting to kind of analyze these reports that they're getting from FedEx and UPS. And what they're trying to do is just determine who the licensee is, right? For all of these packages that are coming into my state.
Who's the owner and who's liable, and who has to pay the taxes?
Who owns the license and who is paying the taxes? Correct. Right. So they're trying to match these up, and then if they see something that doesn't look right, something that doesn't, it looks like a package is coming in without a license, then they'll go to FedEx and UPS and say, hey, I think this business doesn't have a license. Can you please stop shipping from them into this state? And so now you see the carriers keeping track of who holds licenses in which states, and they should be blocking, for the most part, shipments from licensees that do not hold licenses where a license is required. But then the next level on that is this fulfillment house issue, which is really blowing up right now. And that happened in Tennessee this year, where I think it was on the order of 60-70% of the packages say they're coming from a fulfillment warehouse
that may be located in the state of Tennessee.
Well, in California, for example.
Oh, okay. So fulfillment house in California,
right? Because a lot of California wineries, right, store their products, and then these fulfillment houses do the pack and ship, right, from their warehouse, and the packages look like they're coming from those, even though that winery that they're shipping on behalf of may hold a valid license in Tennessee, and does in most cases. The agency can't see who that licensee is, right? So they're looking for additional visibility there. And, in a lot of cases, they've changed their laws to create a license for these fulfillment houses, and then a requirement that the fulfillment house report who's making the shipment. And in other cases, they don't require a license, but they do ask the fulfillment house to report. The whole point of all of it is just to simply make sure that when packages come in, that A, somebody holds a license, B, taxes are paid, and C, they're following the rules.
And that's what Avalara is all about, that it provides the service for these shippers to comply with the law as best they can and as best anybody knows, because you guys are kind of the central repository for how to do all this stuff.
Yeah, Yeah, we're focused on tax and compliance, and we help suppliers mainly, but also marketplaces and retailers and wholesalers in some cases. But we help in both channels, right? Both when products are moving through the three-tier system, and there's a set of compliance requirements when you're moving through the three-tier system, and in the direct-to-consumer channel. And that's where it really gets complex in terms of sales and use tax calculation, alcohol tax calculation, filing of these tax returns, registering products, all that, all the rules associated with it. Those are the problems that we help solve for people.
Okay, so you use the term marketplaces. Define
Yeah,
that for me.
yeah. So a fundamental concept in the world of alcohol is that only licensees can sell. However, you go on to a Vivino or some of these other marketplaces or delivery apps. You mentioned Instacart, right? And in a lot of cases, they don't hold any licenses. So, in the eyes of the regulators, those platforms are effectively soliciting sales on behalf of licensees and kind of routing those orders to the licensees to accept and fulfill. And then the compliance obligation really is primarily on the licensee at that point. So that's what I mean when I say marketplace is an unlicensed business that's taking orders or facilitating orders on behalf of licensees.
Okay, so when you say marketplaces, it's kind of like when I say third party facilitators,
Yeah.
or we used to say delivery within an hour. So, further complicating the issue is part of it is interstate shipment. And how does that fit under the umbrella of e commerce when e commerce can happen both intra and interstate? And depending on how the delivery goes, whether it's done by the retailer himself with one of themselves, with one of their people delivering into a house in a local area, an apartment in a local area, or through a common carrier. Not different sets of, I
Absolutely.
guess they are different sets of rules and regulations that apply to each of those. And so that's where some of the refinement in these third party facilitators and marketplaces comes, because the way they're structured allows them to do a certain number of.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I
So there's e
mhm.
commerce, and then there's interstate shipment, and they're related, but one does not, overarch the other.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's an important point. Like we think about we tend to use these terms pretty loose.
Equate them, and they're not. Yeah.
Yeah, we use these terms loosely, and to me, e-commerce can, in the world of alcohol, there's really at least two channels underneath that. One would be direct to consumer shipping, and to me that's more typically from a winery. It's going across state lines. As you mentioned, it's using a FedEx or a UPS, a common carrier, to deliver the package versus intrastate delivery, which a lot of these businesses and marketplace apps are using. Like if you look at like a Drizzly or an Instacart or whatever, they're really making deliveries on behalf of local retailers that have the privilege of delivering within the state or within that geographical territory.
Okay. So a lot of the Italian people that I work with find the whole three-tier system complicated. Interstate shipping is too. Well, in the presentation that I did, I kind of use an umbrella metaphor. Here's the umbrella, which is the overarching thing, e-commerce, and the DTC, direct to consumer, I define as direct from a domestic winery to a consumer, either inter or intrastate, and trying not to use DTC to describe sales from a retailer to a consumer, either in a state or us. Now, that's my definition, but the problem is that's not everybody else's definition. And so when you say DTC and I think e-commerce, we're not necessarily talking the same thing. So it takes something that's already confusing and makes it more so when we're trying to make it more understandable.
Yeah, and you and I are in the thick of this, Steve, right? Like we see it and we talk about it all day long, and we don't even have common definitions. Imagine being a regulator or a legislator, right? And these things get confusing, and there tends to be a lot of conflation of these different concepts, and that's why I do think over the coming years you'll probably see some additional legislation to get a little bit clear on some of these definitions and what's allowed.
Yeah. I had the chance to read some of the I don't know what you would call it, minutes from whether they're hearing, minutes from whether they're hearings or a lawsuit or whatever it happens to be. And it is so clear that many of the people who are on the deciding side have no concept of the three-tier system and all the legal things that apply and append to that. So it's kind of like the blind leading the blind, or the blind leading the clueless.
There's a lot of different concepts to keep track of, right? And I think you hear like legislators in particular get confused about what is a fulfillment house, what is a marketplace, what is a winery and a retailer, and all these things that we use every day isn't apparent necessarily to the general public, maybe to your clients in Italy and to the legislators in particular.
Well stated. I'm a little bit cut to the heart of it. And everybody is well-meaning, because the legislators are looking out for the things that are their responsibility, which is legal compliance, taxes, mostly TTB, for making sure that the American population is protected from false advertising and bad product and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I've been getting involved in lately is just to add complexity to complexity. Is the issue in e-commerce, meaning I'm only talking about retailers now, using third-party facilitators. Who owns the data, meaning who owns the relationship with the consumer? And I've always known it was there and it was an issue, but in one of the interviews I did with someone a couple of weeks ago, actually it was, I won't even name the name because I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but they were distinguishing between a third-party facilitator, which helps sell bottles, and another service where the individual retail store owns the customer relationship. They have the data and they can then remarket to those people. And that helps him build his business. So that becomes really, really significant. And I think I have found it is overlooked. So in the slide I showed at the conference, I put e-commerce into like 6 different buckets, just, to really confuse everybody. I thought it was simplifying things, but really in my mind, from a retailer's point of view, there's only 2 buckets. Who owns the data? And if it's the retailer, that implies and infers and confers certain rights and responsibilities. And if it doesn't, then those things change. At the end of the day, I think, if I can speak for you and Tom, the NAWR and the idea of freeing some of this stuff up, the original one for Free the Grapes, is let us compete. Let the individual retailers, we want to keep the individual retailers in business in the US. They perform a really important service of advising and counseling consumers. I'm having spaghetti. What should I have for the wine with that? As well as convenience, where a individual store, in comparison to an online or virtual store, is differentiated is an inventory. Obviously, there's physical limitation on how many SKUs or bottles can fit into an individual store. And we have what do they call it? The infinite aisle online, the long tail. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's an important issue. Yeah, about who owns the data, and it's tough because I think if you think about it, if I put the compliance lens on it, right, and you put yourself in the shoes of the regulators, they think that the licensee, aka the retailer, is making this sale, right? And so from their perspective, why would the retailer not own that data? But at the same time, yeah, I imagine that some of these third party marketers or marketplaces may put restrictions on what they're able to do in terms of remarketing to these customers. So that's a tricky one. And yeah, that may play out in the future. I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, you dodged that one. Here's another one. So thank you for that. So one other complication. Okay, so I have a client in London, and we were exploring e-commerce, who can do what. And they couldn't look at that data because the e-commerce providers look for your IP address. And if you're in Connecticut, it only shows you the inventory that's available in Connecticut, which might be a completely different set of items that are available in Colorado, California. And I can see why consumers get confused, but more importantly, upset, meaning they taste a wine that they've had somewhere, and then they say, go to their retail store. No, we don't carry it. They can't order it in their state, and they can't have it delivered, and that gets them all frustrated. That's not cool either.
Right. Yeah. No. And you raised an important point earlier, right? Which is that when we're talking about these 47 states that allow wineries to ship, we're talking domestic wineries, and we're talking and a lot of these states, especially the ones that have changed or passed laws recently, that they do put a restriction on the making sure that those products were produced by that winery. So what does that mean? That imported wines are excluded, right? So imported wines just do not have that same level of access. And from a consumer standpoint, yeah, if they're looking to get a direct shipment of imported wine, you're going to have a really hard time. You're going to be primarily limited to those states, those 14 or 15 states that allow retailers to ship, assuming the importer moves it to a retailer, right? Makes that sale through a wholesaler or directly. You're limited to those states, and so it's tough sledding right now for imported products.
Well, there's one thing that happened that I thought was particularly telling. I don't know if people realized what was going on and planned for it to happen, whatever. When that omnibus bill passed back in 2018, I think, in December of 2018, where federal excise taxes on wine, beer, and spirits were dramatically reduced by 90%. That didn't get a lot of visibility to the general public, but it changed the financial calculations of everybody in the business. And it freed up quite a bit of margin for those who were able to follow where it was and how do you get a piece of it. But what I thought was particularly interesting, those reduced taxes were applied not only to domestic wineries and spirit producers, distilleries and breweries, but also imported. That was the first time that one of those laws took into account imported wines and spirits. Do you think that was planned, or was that just something that happened and nobody was paying attention?
Oof, man, I don't know if I am an expert on that one in terms of how that played out.
Well, let's speculate.
Well, I mean, I know that there's NABI, the National Association of Beverage Importers, and they're well connected, and they certainly have a purpose, and they're at the table, right, in a lot of these discussions. And I know that there was quite a bit of collaboration on that, the Craft Beverage Modernization Act. I think that's what it was called. And so presumably, yeah, importers were at the table, and that they they were included. And I'm speculating. I don't have a lot of background on how that played out.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading into it that there's a crack. It's a little one, maybe it's just a hairline crack, but at least the idea is now on the table. That and it is that something that can then be pointed to that okay, this was made and it applied to these people. Why doesn't this do it?
Yeah, and this is where I'm also not an expert. I'm getting outside of my depths, but I've heard others make a case that certain international trade agreements like WTO, right, might have an issue with some of these laws that don't allow for the imported products. But I really shouldn't go there because I'm not an expert.
Well, we're all kind of getting into that now. The resultant edge of that, with cutting the tariffs, punitive tariffs for the UK, and the Scotch industry just got hammered. I heard they were down like 25%. It was the number I saw because the taxes were applied just to those things and had nothing to do with the issue at hand, which was, I think that one was Airbus. No, it was the UK thing. So I don't think it was the Airbus. They had another thing that somebody was pissed off at somebody else about. And they said, yeah, so, okay, England, Scotland. Yeah, let's put a tax on Scotch. That'll hurt them. In France, so we'll put a tax on wine. Yeah, that's what'll hurt them. And then it kind of just all escalated to not make any sense at all. And yet here they were. So they just removed the UK thing. Does that, or the UK punitive tax on spirits, how does that affect Avalara, and how do you guys adapt to changes like that?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're primarily focused with state issues, state regulatory compliance, and so I know that this has been the whole tariff issue. It's been a really big issue, especially for groups like the Distilled Spirits Council that they've been hard at work, and so it's good to see those get lifted because I know that was challenging for them and for a lot of their members and for just a lot of distilleries around the country, and so.
And people who couldn't get the product they want and were now paying, 25% more.
Yeah. Yep. That has been an ongoing challenge. So I think there's a lot of relief and a lot from a lot of people about those getting removed.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that's related to what we're talking about, but not smack in your wheelhouse or my wheelhouse. We've had COVID, made some incredible changes in the industry, particularly in the on-premise. But now on things are not coming back to normal, but they are progressing forward. So we're just today was reported inflation was 6.8%. I don't know what period of time, whether it's a month or something, but it's a significant thing now. We never had to deal with it. We haven't had to deal with it for 30 years. It's going to have as dramatic an impact, I think, on the beverage alcohol industry as the CBMA did in reducing taxes. Do you have any ideas? Can you put in your crystal ball and say, what impact is inflation going to have in the industry?
Oh man, no. I would
Not going to
probably
touch that
I
one?
would probably stay away from that. I'm going to be light on the economic theory stuff. So no, I would probably stay away.
Well, I will put this into the conversation. I'll answer my own question, and that is I've seen this happen that because of the CBMA drop and because the federal tax is put into the hierarchy, if you will, if you're going down of, here's your X works price at the factory, and here's your, laid-in price to the importer to distributor, distributor to retailer, and all that. If you lower the number higher up on that chain, it frees up a lot of margin and movement to put things in. Now we've got inflation coming back at the end. There's a lot of people that are, especially exporters, that heard about CBMA, haven't looked into it, don't know about it, and should be.
Yeah, I think it did have a substantial impact. I am not going to comment on how inflation is going to kind of reverse some of the things that put into place, but
Okay, you're really making me work here.
I'm
All right,
sorry.
so
I'm sorry.
it's okay. It's fine. It's fun. It's fun. I had mentioned earlier. I listened to the webinar you and Tom did a couple of weeks. It was like early October. I thought it was great. Same kind of thing. You guys tend to agree a lot more, I think.
We tend to agree on quite a lot of issues. Yes.
Okay. So now here's what I think as the GM of an important part of this whole equation. Out of what we just talked about, somebody listening, what's the most important thing that we talked about that they can take action on to improve their business?
Well, I think that this marketplace issue is pretty big, right? I do think that you're seeing massive investment when you look at Uber.
Just saw minibar delivery got bought. They didn't say how much, but I'm sure it had at least 6 zeros. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mini bar, reserve bar. You saw Uber acquire Drizzly. You saw Vivino raise lots of money. I mean, there's been quite a bit of investment coming in, and it does feel like that's kind of shifting where some of these platforms are going to start to become a little bit more dominant, and I think the industry is going to have a little bit of catch up to do in terms of how regulation works. And one thing that we get a lot of questions about in our business is there was another Supreme Court case, Wayfair versus South Dakota, that changed a lot of things related to sales tax collection. And now marketplaces in almost all states have an obligation to collect sales tax above a certain threshold. And so how that kind of impacts the alcohol regulation and how the money flows and who pays taxes is getting a little bit complicated and hard to understand for people. And so we've been making a point of getting a lot of blog posts and webinars, and we're going to actually be doing one on this particular topic in December, I believe, to just help educate both marketplaces and licensees that are participating in marketplaces about how to do this compliantly without putting your business at risk.
Cool. So why don't you give us your email address and tell our listeners where they can go to participate or listen in on these webinars and maybe hear some of the ones like the one you did with Tom last month?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. My email is jeff.carroll@avalara.com, jeff.carroll at avalara.com. And avalara.com, we've got, blog and webinar resources and all kinds of, tools that can be used to help understand this stuff. So that's a great destination. It's just kind of going to our website and browsing those tools.
And that's my recommendation to a lot of people. And there's so much to unpack. You'll never understand it all, but at least you'll be able to get straight answers of the most current information on the legislation and how things are done there. And that's a big challenge, because if you look it up in Google, it might be something from 3 months ago. Well, yesterday you couldn't ship to Iowa.
Yeah. And then another thing I would say is we have a partnership with Wine Institute, and we kind of co-host and maintain this compliance rules portal, and that's at wineinstitute.compliancerules.org. And that's where you're going to see state by state breakdowns of all the rules, how to get licensed, the returns that you need to file, and any developments, right? Anytime there's a change to a state, you're going to have a state alert there. And that's a free resource. And so that is for wineries, right? But it's got a ton of information on there about how to comply and what the rules are and all of that stuff. It's a great resource.
Good. Say it again. What was it?
wineinstitute.compliancerules.org, or you can just get there from wineinstitute.org. wineinstitute.org.
Wine Institute. Yeah, I visited a couple of times. They have some really good maps that list state sales taxes, and some on what states you can sell wine in supermarkets. That's always a lot of question and an issue of interest from a lot of our export producers, because in some countries like UK, most of the wine is coming through supermarkets. That's not the case in the US, and specifically, it's illegal in New York. So that's why I try and tell people, look, there's things you can do in California that are illegal in New York and vice versa. It's a state-based thing. This is not one country. It's 52 different regulatory entities.
That's right. Exactly right.
That's reality. And everyone listening, that's what we have to deal with. Okay. Jeff, I want to thank you for participating and recording this with me. It's been illuminating, and we probably made a couple of mistakes there. So I'm going to give a disclaimer here. We're not lawyers. We're just talking about stuff that we read, and that's interesting related to wine business in the U.S.
Steve, thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
So that was Jeff Carroll, GM of Avalara. We'll see you soon on the circuit.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
This is Steve Raye. Thanks again for listening on behalf of the Italian Wine Podcast.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston, and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love, and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.